I think the most interesting thing when I read oral history is one of the things talk about where did you grow up, how did you grow up, what's your family background, and your early education. So I saw on your website that you were born on April 6, 1946.
Right.
Okay, so can you tell me?
Which makes me one of the so-called post-war baby boom in UK. As soldiers came back, or service people came back from serving abroad at the end of the Second World War in 1945. 9 months after that, there was a baby boom, as you might expect. So I'm one of them.
Okay.
So I'm one of. I have 5 siblings. I'm one of 6 children. 1 older sister and 4 younger brothers and sisters. I was actually born in my grandmother's house in the country, Suffolk, which is on the east coast of England. And although we lived in London, I spent all my holidays for the first 10 years at least, and then a bit longer, at my grandmother's house in Suffolk, in the country, on a river. So, what else do you want to know about about that?
So you were living with your grandmother?
No, I was living in London, going to school in London, but every school holiday for the whole holidays, more or less. We go back to Suffolk. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay. And I mean, I had a very happy childhood. On the river, I learnt to sail. When I was about 10, my grandmother moved not very far, but to a small town on the coast. And then at that point I did a lot of sailing. That was also on a river. So I did a lot of sailing then, and other things that children do. But living and going to school in London. And one of the schools I went to, the school I went to from when I was 6 to when I was 12 or 13, was a French school in London.
A French school in London?
So my parents thought it would be a good idea. There is this large French lycée in the centre of London, which was originally there probably to serve the children of families working in the diplomatic service, not just French, but any nationality, because it's a sort of relic of the time when French was the international language, or the language of diplomacy. So there was this big French school, but there was quite a contingent of English people there, because it was thought to be a good thing to learn French at a young age. So I went there. And then I went to, at 13, I went to an English public school, what's called public school in England, which is a private school, actually. It's a funny kind of terminology, but it's a rather expensive private school. So I went there from 13 to 17 or 18 or something, and then went to Cambridge as my university. Did a maths degree there.
Right. Yes. So before we move on to Cambridge, was there any influential people who might have influenced you to take mathematics, or in the future computer science?
Right. Okay. So my father was an academic, but in a completely different subject. He was a classical archaeologist. Greek art and archaeology was his main interest. But he was an academic, which I probably had some influence on what I did. My mother had been a mathematician, although she was a full-time mother. So she had done a maths degree originally, I certainly felt more at home in mathematics than in classics or art or anything like that at school. Certainly at secondary school, I did. I've just found maths easy. I mean, there could hardly be anything that would have influenced me to go into computer science, because computer science didn't exist then. But I mean, there were. It was in
the 60s.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm talking about. So I was at my secondary school from 60 to 64. Right. I'm up at the public school. That's right. So computers existed just about. Computer science as a discipline did not exist.
Right.
That's more recent than that. But I mean, I didn't know anything about computers. I guess in the last year of my maths degree, there was a little bit of computing, and then immediately after my maths degree, I went on to do information science, and there was a little bit of computing in that, but not very much.
Oh, so that was 67.
67 to 8, yes.
7 to 8, and there was not a lot of computing. And
no.
So how? What is information retrieval or information science?
Okay. It's quite a lot. Okay, so the person who ran that department, that City University, had been a information officer in a technical industry. I can't remember which. Yeah, I do. It was Tate and Lyle, which is a big sugar company. So he'd been. So the more technical industries, sort of engineering, sciences, medicine, food, that kind of thing. Those big companies had very substantial technical information departments, which would have publications, published papers and reports, and internal reports, indexed in some form, not on a computer, okay, and searchable through indexes. So the indexes might be some kind of card catalogue, traditional library card catalogue, or possibly some kind of, so I don't know if you've ever come across punch cards. Yes, okay. So two kinds of punch cards. One of them is the old Hollerith cards, which were invented for analysing census in the 1890s, and were mechanically sortable. So you could take a deck of cards, put it into a hopper.
And that was IBM.
That was IBM. Actually, there were several punch card companies, but IBM was the biggest one. And IBM actually was descended from the original company formed by Hollerith.
Right.
So there were IBM punch cards and other similar things. And then there was another kind of punch cards called peekaboo cards. Have you ever come across them?
No, this one.
Okay, so not for mechanical sorting, but they're rather large cards with a grid on them. And each card represents an index term, a word or a sort of subject heading, but assigned in such a way that they can be combined with Boolean and. So you could say, I want all the documents that contain this term and this term. Okay. So how it works is there's a grid, and the grid represents document number IDs. So any number is read off the grid as a sort of XY coordinate for a position on the grid. So if you want to index this document represented by this number with with this heading, this index term, then you punch a hole there. Okay. So then when you want to do a search, you can you pick up a single card and look at the holes, but also you can pick up two cards, put them on top of each other, and look at the holes. Right. And a hole through two cards is a document that's indexed by both those terms. So it's a Boolean and. Okay? Okay. And those systems, that idea was actually invented in 1914, but was used in a number of. It wasn't invented for a different purpose, but it was used in a number of technical information departments in Uh,
And that was
50s, 60s, yes.
okay, and that
40s maybe.
it was invented in the UK too, or is this
it was invented
Belgium?
in different places actually. So the original invention in 1914 or 13 maybe, I can't remember, was to identify species of birds. And there was a US patent for that. I think it was a US patent for that.
Okay.
I think it was US. I wouldn't swear to that. Okay. But it was reinvented at least one other time, maybe more than once, for indexing documents in a technical library. Right. And one of those was a UK one. Yes. Okay. But it was used in different places. I know there were American ones as well.
Okay, so it was not encryption and
no encryption. No.
Takes you to information science.
Oh no, sorry. No, I wasn't particularly interested in encryption. No, actually, okay. So for my personal history, I did the maths degree, not really knowing what I wanted to do next. I had an idea that I might teach in school. I got married in the end of the second year of my degree to a teacher, an art teacher, and that sort of put me off the idea of teaching. I decided I couldn't do it. I'm glad I had decided that before I tried it. Actually, I don't think I could have done it, not in school. So I was looking for what else to do, and I wasn't. I was married, and I didn't want to continue on a student grant. I could have maybe gone on to do research in maths, but I didn't want to do that because I wanted a job. Somebody, I sort of looked at the work that these technical information officers did and thought I might be interested in that, and I took this one-year master's course at City University.
Was it a taught program or?
Was it a
taught program?
Yeah, it was taught with a 3-month dissertation at the end, 4 months maybe, which was and the taught part was very much oriented to people who were going to do what this man who ran the course did, that is, become technical information officers in industries of various kinds, or maybe in some kind of library. And that I wasn't really inspired by that, but a chunk of the course was about information retrieval, and I did my dissertation on metrics, evaluation metrics. Okay, so this is 67 to 68 actually I did the dissertation, which is 2 years after the publication of the second Cranfield project. Okay. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Okay, so that was the second Cranfield project was the one that sort of established the notion that you have this collection of documents, some queries, some kind of relevance judgments, and some evaluation procedure for different systems of information retrieval. Incidentally, the Cranfield project, the particular systems that were evaluated in the Cranfield project were all library-type systems. So there was universal decimal classification, a form of faceted classification, uniterms, which was a sort of indexing system suitable for those peekaboo cards that I mentioned, and something else I can't remember. So all systems that were run, operated, designed by sort of library people, and the Cranfield project was done. It was done in a rather mechanistic way, but entirely without the help of any machines of any kind. So they had clerks doing tasks which seems very strange now because they're sort of obvious things for a computer. And I mean, there were computers around some computers around in between 1962 and 1966 when the Cranfield project happened. But it was run by a librarian who didn't know about such things and did know about organising card indexes and getting people to search them in systematic ways. So that was how it was done, completely without machines. By the time I did the course there were some, the information science course, there were some computer-based systems, one or two. So I think probably the, do you know about, have you heard of Medlars or Medline or PubMed?
Medline.
Yeah, okay, so what was at the time Medlars, Medical Literature Analysis and Retrieval Service, was running on mainframe computers in 1966 or 7 maybe, and it morphed into Medline, which morphed into PubMed. Okay. So it still exists in a form, but at the time in the late 60s, if you wanted to search Medlars, what you do is I'm a medical researcher in Dublin. I want to search Medlars. I write a letter, put it in the snail mail, send it off to the National Library of Medicine in Maryland,
and wait.
And they at the other end, a specialist searcher, a specialist intermediary searcher, would formulate my question as a search, as a Boolean search statement of some kind. It'd be run overnight on the machines there, and the printout would be sent back to me by mail. So it would be a question of actually physically crossing the Atlantic twice, yeah. So that existed, and we learnt a bit about that in the course, and also the big scientific abstracts journals. I mean, Index Medicus, which was the basis for Medlars, is one of them, but things like Chemical Abstracts and Physics Abstracts were beginning to computerize their production process, not with a view to searching, but with a view to helping in the production of the printed indexes. But the result of that was that the data existed in machine-readable form, and if you were one of these big technical companies running a technical library, you could maybe afford to buy a tape of Chemical Abstracts. And so that was happening just about in the, well, not really till the early 70s. In the early 70s, that started happening in a big way, and then one or two companies like Lockheed Dialog started accumulating these tapes from different abstracting services and offering search to anybody for a payment, which eventually became, well, was some form of online search. Not through the internet, because the internet didn't exist, but you could have a dial-up connection. Since the computers sat in California, you'd have to have a dial-up connection from wherever you are here to California, which was rather expensive, and a slow printing terminal. So an IBM, what was it? Yeah, 12 character a second. 12 character a second is slower than you like to read. So character by character. And the first one I used actually was also a printing terminal of 30 characters a second, which was about as fast as you could reasonably read. Okay. And that was first one I used, I think, was probably in about 1971, maybe. Yeah, something like that.
Okay, so you have encountered Cranfield experiments and all these machines during the master's program.
That's right. But since I mean, information retrieval was an intellectual discipline. Right. Okay, computers might or might not be useful. Okay, as to help you do it, but it was about the intellectual discipline. Right. It was about the ideas of. And most of the discussion at the time in information retrieval was about whether you could represent different subjects with, let's say, a faceted classification or a decimal, a hierarchical decimal classification.
Days, they were using very discrete systems.
Absolutely, and generating fierce arguments between the proponents of the different systems, which was actually what the original Cranfield project was designed to answer. It was designed to answer. So the people who believed in faceted classification would say you can't do it with a hierarchical system. It doesn't work. You need these facets, and vice versa. And Cranfield was designed to answer those queries. Of course, it didn't, but it was designed to do so.
Very nice. So, and then let's see. So you got your master's in '68.
Yeah.
And then you went to ASLE.
Yes.
Before you actually do the PhD.
Yes, I did. Yes. So do you know about ASLE at all?
I know about strip lights running a little bit.
Yes, of course he worked there. Yes. He worked there a little after I did. That's right. Yeah. So
you two didn't cross paths.
We didn't cross paths there. No. So it was a sort of part public funded, part industry funded sort of research association for information. And we were in the research department. Both Blaise and I were in the research department there, which was an interesting place. We mostly did relatively short-term projects, specifically funded projects. So, for example, I did a project on how facsimile transmission might be used in information services.
Okay.
It was the early days of facsimile transmission. There were one or two fax devices, and there were one or two sort of distributed information services where if you send off or telephone somewhere remotely to say, I want you to find out about this for me, to a technical library, let's say. I want you to find out about this for me, and one response might be to fax you back some document or other. Except that fax at that time was only suitable for sort of single page or a very small number of pages, because it took quite a long time and it was involved printing out slowly at the other end. And there were some people who had ideas which now seem quite strange, but in a way sort of prefigure the sort of notion of storing documents electronically. I mean, they didn't have that idea, but there was a national library service based in Yorkshire, in the centre of England, which was serving a lot of people by post, often photocopying articles and supplying them by post on request. And the director of that library had the idea that maybe at some point in the future it'd be feasible to use fax instead of post, which is a bit like serving it from an electronic database. Right. You'd have to scan it, but maybe you could store the results of scanning or something, or whatever. So that idea was around, and I did a report which was. I didn't really think that fax was a very good mechanism for doing this, but it was interesting to do the report. So that kind of thing, and that was a 3-month study or something like that. Okay. But at the same time, so the then director of the research department at ASLE was B.C. Vickery. Do you know the name?
Yes.
Brian Vickery.
You have to know the name.
Okay. He was. I mean, he'd come from exactly that environment. He'd actually worked at the National Library that I was talking about, but he was interested in a lot of things about information retrieval, and published a number of books which were at the time standard textbooks on the field. He was quite happy for me to spend some of my own time doing my own research, and I'd been sort of somewhat fired up by doing the dissertation project, the evaluation metrics. So I got in touch with Karen Spark-Jones at the time, who was in Cambridge doing stuff with the Cranfield collection on term clustering and things like that, and got quite stimulated to do some of my own work. Published a couple of papers. Started. So of the people people in the field that from that time, apart from Karen. There's also Bertie Brooks. He was at University College, and he'd written something that I'd used in my dissertation project, which I disagreed with actually. But anyway, I was quite opinionated. Faradane, who ran the City Department, was impressed by my dissertation and sent it to Bertie Brooks. And Bertie Brooks said it should be published. So I wrote 2 papers based on it. I split it into 2 papers, published in Journal of Documentation, which was published by ASLIB. But Bertie Brooks was on the editorial board of that. And so sort of more or less following on from that, which sort of made sense. I mean, it took me a couple of years to get around to it, but it sort of made sense that I would start a PhD at University College with Bertie Brooks as my supervisor. So I did. Probably in about 1970 I started.
All right. So you met
71.
Karen Sparrow-Jones before
I met,
yes, went into the PhD program?
That's right. Yeah, I did. And I was sort of thinking of other ways that you could analyse the Cranfield results, right, and got some interaction with her on that. So I started PhD. I started it part-time. I think it was 1970.
Okay.
And still working at ASLIB.
Right.
I still wanted in UK it's hard to do a PhD and get paid a salary at the same time. There isn't the system that there is in the US. There isn't the system of sort of salaried or at least reasonably paid technical support staff, teaching support staff. That notion isn't really there in UK universities. It's sort of coming in a little bit, but it isn't really there. If you want to do a PhD full time, you might be able to get a grant to do it, but it wouldn't be anything like up to the level of a salary. And so I wanted to continue working. So I wanted to continue getting a salary. So I continued working at ASLIB and doing this PhD part time. And then, so there was at the time a very small scheme for research fellowships in information. It was called Scientific Information, and they were run by the Royal Society in London, which is the famous original scientific society. So Royal Society runs a number of research fellowships and research professorships and things like that. But they had 2 research fellowships for scientific information, of which the 2 first holders were Karen Sparrow-Jones and Nick Jardine, whom you probably haven't heard of. Okay. They were very good, very nice research fellowships. They lasted for a maximum of 5 years, paid a good university salary, in UK terms, good university salary, equivalent to a junior lecturer, but quite decent, and allowed you to do whatever you wanted to do, more or less. So Karen had that fellowship, which from 68 to 73. And Nick Jardine had the same time period. So in 73, there were two fellowships going vacant, and there were presumably a number of applicants. But I applied and I got one, and held it from 73 to 78. The other person who got the second one was Keith van Rijsbergen, but he'd been a student of Nick Jardine's, but he'd gone elsewhere. He'd gone back to Australia, I think. So he postponed for a year, so he started the year after me. But so from 73 to 78, I held the fellowship at University College. You could hold it where you liked. So I went to University College then, and what was a little surprising was that they gave it to me, despite the fact that I hadn't yet got my PhD. So it was sort of a postdoc fellowship, and I mean Karen was already had a doctorate, Nick already had a doctorate, Keith already had a doctorate, but I didn't. But they decided I was get well on the way to, and that I could have it anyway. So I finished my PhD as part of that fellowship, which was very nice, and also obviously continued to discuss things a lot with Karen, which was she was in Cambridge, I was in London, and we didn't have email then, so we wrote letters.
Oh, very nice.
Some of which I still have. The other person who was at University College at the time was Nick Belkin. Do you know Nick?
Yeah, Rutgers.
Yeah, Rutgers. Yeah. So he was also a PhD student of Bertie Brooks. He started a little after me, not very much, and finished his doctorate. When he finished his doctorate, which was a little after I moved to University College, he went to teach at City University where I had been. Okay. So he was around. And in '75, when he was still at University College, we, that is chiefly B.C. Vickery, B.C. Brooks, Nick Belkin and myself, actually Nick Belkin did more work than anybody else, we organised a research colloquium at University College, which involved a number of people, some of whom you've probably heard of, and Karen in particular. Shortly before that, Karen had sent me, as part of our general discussions of things, had sent me a paper by one of Jerry Sorton's students.
Okay.
I said, I think I can do better than that.
Okay, so back then there was two different fields, would that be? Or because Solon was he's more recognized as a computer scientist.
A computer scientist. There's quite an interesting mixture. There's some, I mean, Karen worked in a computer lab in Cambridge, but had an arts degree and didn't regard herself exactly as a computer scientist. She started working on semantics, fairly early in this process, she got married to Roger Needham, who was a computer scientist. So they two worked together, and Karen sort of got her position in the computer lab at Cambridge, which was then called the Mathematical Laboratory, but never mind. As a researcher. Partly because she and Roger had developed some programs to do clustering, and she'd evaluated them and so on. So Karen was sort of between the two. Okay. She never had a library training, but she did have this linguistics and semantics training, which was right outside of computer science. But she sort of allowed herself to be absorbed into the computer lab in Cambridge. She never really regarded herself as a computer scientist, though. And then there were people like the Sheffield University Library School people. So at the time there was a man called Michael Lynch. Yes. More recently, up to and including now, there's Peter Willett, who had been a student of Michael Lynch's, doing stuff on
systems.
On systems, including some very technical systems. So Peter Willett, I'm not sure whether he would regard himself as a computer scientist. I don't know actually, but he's done, from the library school, he's done some quite heavy computing work, including all the stuff on chemical informatics, which is quite demanding computationally. On the other hand, there were people like Keith, who's definitely a computer scientist. Keith van Rijsbergen, definitely a computer scientist, and his students, who were his two students at the time, were Bruce Croft and David Harper. Okay, so they all regarded themselves as computer scientists, and in the US, indeed, there was Jerry Sorton, who was definitely a computer scientist.
Right. So this is how the overlapping
his work. That's right. But I think the Syracuse people, who were quite active a bit later, I think they were in the library school. I can't remember now. Anyway, so there was quite a mixture, and I mean, it was sort of understood that information retrieval was a problem which spanned those different disciplines. So it was quite important for both kinds of people to be involved. And of course, Nick's gone into library school as well, Nick Belkin. Okay, so in 1975, maybe end of 74, towards the beginning of 75, Karen sent me this paper by one of Jerry's students. Karen and Jerry were in quite a lot of correspondence. And I said, I think I can do better than that. There was this piece of theory there, and I said, I think I can do better than that. Well, it was sort of within the